Well, are banks safe? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if you got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. At the website, you will find a link at the top of the page, the front page. It says Ask Prudent Money. Just click through, ask your question, and we'll get right back to you within the day and get you taken care of. Whatever you need, we want to be there to help you out. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, before we can have a good discussion on banks and answer the question, are banks safe? We really have to assess the kind of environment today. Because if you follow the business of gloom and doom and how all that works, you'll find that everything has got a gloom and doom forecast to it. It's just a matter of what financial crisis are we going to face yet or coming up. And you know what's interesting, if you look back in 2008 during the financial crisis, the largest bank in the country, I don't think was in the world, but definitely the country, was Washington Mutual. Do you remember that? And Washington Mutual went out of business. They defaulted. And that was the first big major bank default. And if you're going to pick a big one, that one would be it. Is about as major of a default as you can get. Some are credible, these forecasts of gloom and doom, but most of these gloom and doom predictions and forecasting, and I get tons of them, and I'm sure you do too. Wanting to tell you how the world's going to end or how the financial system's going to collapse or whatever's going to happen. And then it's going to tell you, the message is, if you just buy our book, we'll be able to tell you the steps to take and what you need to do to protect yourself in one of these in these times of crisis. So I remember some of these gloom and doom writers, whatever you want to call them, the business of, that are profiting from people being scared. And they're giving people a reason to be scared by coming up with, really, anything can happen. I'm not going to say that the gloom and doom predictions and forecasts aren't going to happen, but many different situations could happen and could appear. We could have a financial crisis. We could have the dollar collapse. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But you know as well as I do, anything that's coming from that industry and is out there for the public to read is there to tell you the bad things that are going to happen. And then you just have the regular rumor mill. And one of my favorite examples of this was Dr. Teresa Ghilarducci. She is a very, very liberal professor at a think tank in New York. I believe that's right, in New York. And she was credited with the rumor that the government was going to take over the 401k plan and was going to take our assets and use them in a different way. And it was during the financial crisis in 2008, October to be exact. She held a meeting with about a handful of senators about her thoughts of retirement today. As we're watching, everybody's retirement plan is getting obliterated, and she's got a solution to it, and she thought this was perfect timing to come talk to this handful of senators about not the government taking things over, but the government adding a Social Security type 2 benefit that could bring some safety and security amongst retirees, future retirees. The way that she looked at it is people were, excuse me for saying it this way, people are too dumb to take care of their own retirement. That was really some kind of the underlying theme behind the way she thought and the books that she wrote. And they were very, very borderline, probably more so on the socialist side. I think that's safe to say. And liberals probably being too light. And so she had this conversation. Well, the internet got a hold of this conversation, and the next thing you know, the story is Dr. Teresa Ghilarducci is working with Congress to put together a plan to take people's 401k plans. And I had an opportunity to interview Dr. Ghilarducci. And I asked her about that day. I said, did you have was it your goal, your objective, or anything like that to suggest that the government should take over retirement plans? She said, glad you asked that question. No, that was never the intent, but that was what circulated because of that meeting that I had. She was really talking about this Social Security II benefit that she had been promoting in her latest book, and not this government takeover. But yet, to this day, there is still rumors of a government takeover of 401k plan. I've always said that we would have to be a much different society for the politicians to think that they could do that and pull it off. Said another way, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I'm saying that the probabilities of it happening are very, very slim, and we're looking out 15, 20, 25, 30 years of something like that could happen. So you can see how the rumor mill would get started in a meeting here, a meeting there, a comment by somebody of influence. Then there's credible information, which leads us today into our discussion about banks. The credible information would be from people like Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon is the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, and J.P. Morgan Chase is the largest bank in the country with about almost $5 trillion worth of assets. As far as worldwide goes, they're number 5, the 5th largest bank as far as assets. Now, this is an interesting story that did not really get as much of let me say it this way. The public didn't get the full details. We'll leave it at that. There was a bank, if you'll remember, back in 2023, there were roughly 7 or 8 banks that defaulted on their debt and were taken over by the FDIC or somebody or some institution in the government took them over. The biggest one was First Republic Bank, and it was a pretty major bank, 14th largest commercial bank in the U.S., assets and deposits exceeding those of Silicon Valley Bank, which was another big bank that defaulted. Total assets of First Republican Bank was $233 billion, of which about 48 to 68% of those assets were uninsured. So what happened was, and this during the financial crisis, I would always go to the FDIC page and just check and see what banks were being taken over this week. They always took over the banks on Friday, it seemed like. And you could get a real-time listing and you could see what Monday would bring, because Friday they shut down, X number of banks. What's interesting is that today confidence is more important than anything. Anything in the is more important than banks. More important than uh, the Fed, the Federal Reserve Board. Confidence rules, and the government's going to do everything they can possibly do to strengthen confidence so that people are confident in the system. Now, the FDIC has rules that are in place that state, they're going to insure a certain percentage, a certain dollar amount, usually $250,000 of an investor or a customer's assets from being lost in some type of a bank default. Do you know that bank, they called Jamie Dimon in? Remember, I told you Jamie Dimon's the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, and he's kind of their go-to fixer. So they called Jamie Dimon in, and by Monday of that next week, so Friday the bank defaulted, was taken over. By Monday of the next week, the bank had on all their branches had new signage out that said J.P. Morgan Chase or Chase Bank. They changed those banking centers to J.P. Morgan within, probably not even 3 days, over a weekend, and so that gave the stock market, that gave investors confidence that everything was going to be okay. But what really happened will blow your mind. We'll talk about that in a second. This is Bob Brooks. We're up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Hey, if you got a question for me, just go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. There is a link at the top of the page called, it just says Ask Prudent Money, and all you have to do is click through there and get to the Q&A and send it in. I'll get you taken care of. That's very easy way to get information that's off the website, prudentmoney.com. Hey, if you're missing a program or there's other times that are better to listen to the program, you can always go to the podcast. We're on Apple, Spotify, really every major platform. And you can also catch the program at prudentmoney.com. A copy is a podcast of the program is available about 10-15 minutes after each day that we have the program. So that's another way to get information at your convenience. And more information about that can be found at prudentmoney.com. We're talking about First Republic Bank, major bank, 14th largest commercial bank in the United States. And this bank went down. So it reorged a couple of days into a J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. And do you know that the FDIC is only there to protect a certain amount of assets? They made it as if that bank failure never even happened and covered every single dollar. And I've had that verified, and that's is a true story as far as I know. But that just goes to show you the length that banks will go, that the government will go to make sure that banks are going to be okay. Because that, if you can only imagine a bank shutting down its doors, what kind of chaos that would cause. And if you think about when Lehman Brothers went down and shut down, the fifth largest investment bank in the world, and I'll tell you this too, something a lot of people don't know is that the government made a very, very strategic move. Did it without a whole lot of news that went along with this. But they made every investment bank into a bank. They turned every major investment bank into a bank. So Goldman Sachs wasn't just an investment bank anymore; it was a bank. So if these banks, former investment banks, like Merrill Lynch, they had Bank of America take over Merrill Lynch. The banks they could stand on their own. They just had them changed into banks versus being investment banks. If they had to be banks, then they could control them under banking regulations and rules a lot easier than they could the way that they were established to begin with. So very interesting move by the government. I would say, if from a strategic move, probably a really good one. If they're seeing that they're trying to control confidence and make sure that everything stays okay. But lots of things went down that established. In fact, if you look at what happened during the financial crisis, that established a lot of made a lot of precedents for what is happening today, and the government's a lot more confident in taking things over and doing things to make sure that confidence is still very high in the system. But you can always trace it back, I believe, to the financial crisis. That literally, the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed, the entire financial system almost collapsed with it. And so people often ask me, how could the stock market hold up when blank is happening? And it's something that's happened since, over the last 8 years. And the reply, my reply always is, unless it's worse than the financial crisis, this market can stand up to just about anything. First, maybe initially the market would kind of go into crisis mode, lose a lot. But generally speaking, when the government would bail out certain parts of the markets, then everything would get back going again. And unless you can find a situation that they can't bail out, I think that if they had to do it over with, they wouldn't have picked the biggest mistake they made during the financial crisis was picking and choosing who was going to survive and who was not going to survive. And I'm not really sure of whose incredibly horrible idea was to let Lehman go. But they were, I guess, to the defense of the government, Lehman Brothers was in a horrible shape. I mean, they were running as a bank one day, the next day they were out of money, completely out of money. And so you're talking about major resources that occurred. So once again, are banks safe? Well, first of all, I think that the big banks are the strongest. And I think the big banks are in pretty good shape. I'm a little puzzled as to, starting about a couple of years ago, all the stories of and all the reports of a commercial bank crisis that we're going to face, where people are literally going to be defaulting on hundreds of millions and billions of dollars worth of commercial buildings. And it's going to be a crisis. It was going to happen. And they had all the facts and figures to back it up. And we haven't seen any problems. That just makes me shake my head. I don't know. But as far as banks go, I think as long as the government controls the narrative, and that's important. As long as the government controls the narrative, I think big banks are safe. Now, having said the word safe, I don't want you to walk away with the wrong impression. Yeah, safe means safe. I get that. But safe is a relative term. I don't think really anything is safe. But as long as we can, as a country and as a bank, a government can control the narrative, I think everything is okay. What happens if banks were to fail for some reason in number and collapse in a number of banks at the same time? That would be pretty tough to come from. Even the banks that were starting to be question marked and rumored to be fail, and people were taking runs on the banks, some of these banks in 2023. But I think that and I'm not a real big fan of the big banks, but I think that if you're, whatever safe means, and you're probably okay. There's not a whole lot of attention on banks right now, at least not the big banks. So I hope that that's a roundabout way of saying I think that the banking system is okay. Because if the big banks weren't okay, we'd really be looking at a problem. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. One of the things that's on tap this week that the markets will be watching real closely is the Federal Reserve Board meeting, and maybe we'll get some clarity as to what they're going to do with interest rates. And having said that, right now their stance is let's wait and see. And investors, which just kind of blows my mind. But I guess from backing up a second, I can see where investors as a whole are getting this confidence that the situation with Iran and Israel is going to be, it's not as bad as predicted. It's going to get over with pretty quick, and maybe it will. Hopefully, it will. But with the price of oil being what it is, and the things that could happen, I wouldn't get just overly confident just quite yet. But the market is, in the event that starts to go sideways, even more so than it has, and becomes a real big problem. What we can't deal with is the price of oil spiking and going over $100 a barrel, for instance. That's going to crank up inflation. And then we've really got the Fed put behind the corner, into the corner of the room, and whether they'll either have to cut rates and risk the inflation rate going up quite a bit, or they'll have to lower rates to save the economy. Don't forget, the economy is slowly but surely losing power. And we talked about this last week, and it's a real concern. Not getting a lot of press, and but if you look at the numbers are starting to say, hey, we may have a problem here. So if that's the case, what can the Fed do without potentially risking? They're either going to risk a far deeper recession, or they're going to risk a scenario where inflation gets reignited. I was talking about this with Tony Joe on Friday, and I described it as a powder keg that's already lit. It's not in danger of blowing up yet, but you add more fire to it, and it probably will. So we'll, and once again, not to be the gloom and doom by any stretch, just trying to show you both sides of the aisle, and trying to show you how you can compare one against the other and come to your own decisions as what you think risk really is when it comes to investing. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. You are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.